What's up everyone, I'm Lars, as you know, and today's video is going to be a little bit different, because today I'm going to be telling you about some conspiracy theories about the Beatles. And I went on a whole video spree I looked through articles for conspiracy theories about my favorite band, the Beatles. So, everyone knows that the Beatles are pretty much the most popular band ever, pretty much. Everyone knows who the Beatles are. They were iconic, and they still are. People are still talking about them. People are still obsessed with the Beatles, not as much as they used to be. Teenage girls were obsessed with them and how they looked. They would go to their concerts and just scream the entire time. They would piss themselves in their seats. Teenage boys would comb their hair into the bowl cuts that they had. People were fucking obsessed with the Beatles. They called it Beatlemania. It still exists in 2017. Beatlemania in 2017 exists, okay. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about something a little bit creepier. Beatles conspiracy theories. Should probably stop trying to act creepy. It's probably just not working at all. Oh well. So there's quite a few conspiracy theories about the Beatles that I found, at least. I'm sure there's more than just the ones I'm going to talk about today. The most famous one that everyone knows is the Paul is dead theory, which I'll get to that one later because there's a lot to it. I'm going to start with the ones that are a little bit more simple first. The first one I'm going to talk about is the secret Beatles songs conspiracy. Now, there's a theory that the Beatles are actually hiding songs. There are secret Beatles songs hidden away in the vaults of Apple Records that the Beatles recorded and didn't release because they wanted to keep them and release them if they ever needed money. So they made these songs and hid them as kind of a backup plan. Now this theory started in 1971 when British teenager Martin Lewis mailed a Beatles bootleg to a magazine and included 4 extra tracks. These tracks were called Colliding Circles, Left is Right and Right is Wrong, Deck Chair, and Pink Litmus Paper Shirt. These were track names that this guy included when he sent the bootleg. Now people kind of freaked out over this. You know, unreleased Beatles songs, what the fuck? Now, what actually happened is this isn't really a conspiracy theory because the guy confessed to it being a hoax. He said that he made up these song names, but some Beatles fans are convinced that he's lying about it being a hoax, that he's just saying it's a hoax so he doesn't get in trouble or something. Now here's a quote from him where he actually says that it's a hoax. To my shock and horror, many Beatles fans refused to believe me. People told me, your confession is a hoax. I know someone who's got those songs. I'm letting the cat out of the bag again. There are no songs. But maybe he's lying. Maybe there are songs. Maybe he just lied to protect those songs. But who knows? Now, when I first heard this theory, I actually believed it could be true. It seemed like the least ridiculous of the Beatles conspiracy theories. You know, it's sort of possible that they could have unreleased stuff, you know, bands have that all the time. I mean, there was recently a release of Queen songs that had previously been unreleased, so it sounded like it could be possible. But then I scrolled down and read that it was a hoax, but who knows? Maybe the guy was lying about his confession. Maybe they really are out there. Let's move on to something that's a little bit more ridiculous. Some writer who went by L. Gunblade had a theory that the Beatles conspired to kill their original drummer, Pete Best. This guy claims to have heard the Beatles talking amongst themselves in a pub. Pete Best went outside and the remaining Beatles, John, Paul, and George, were all talking about how they didn't like Pete Best and how they were gonna get rid of him. And George was saying how they were glad that they were going to get rid of somebody other than himself. So apparently, a bunch of people heard the murder details, but there's not that much to this story, because that didn't happen. He didn't get murdered, there was it's pretty ridiculous. And apparently somebody overheard a plot that they were going to rig the drum set to explode. I don't know, it's pretty ridiculous. The Beatles weren't going to kill their drummer. That one didn't happen. Alright, let's move on to another one that's pretty crazy. Now, this conspiracy theory involves the Illuminati. Now, I don't want to get fucking murdered or anything. That's not gonna happen, right? Oh, great. Now it is gonna happen. Yeah, this conspiracy theory is that the Beatles were actually created by the Illuminati in order to encourage young people to take drugs. Now, this comes from a conspiracy theorist named Dr. John Coleman, and he says that the Beatles weren't famous until the Illuminati stepped in and placed them at the top of the rock and roll mountain. They were a rock and roll sensation because the Illuminati was involved. Now apparently how they did this, how they made the Beatles popular, is that they used a bunch of words to appeal to young people, like rock, cool, teenager, discovered, pop music. You know, they wanted to draw these people in and then convince them to take drugs. I don't know, I think that one's pretty ridiculous. I mean, I think any conspiracy theory that involves the Illuminati getting involved in something is pretty ridiculous, but who knows? Now, I'm gonna get to the one that everyone knows. Yes, this is the Paul is dead theory. So, there are a lot of people that still believe this, that still think that this is true. Now, for those who don't know, there was a huge conspiracy that started around 1969 that Paul McCartney actually died in a car crash in 1966. And how this started was somebody noticed on the Abbey Road album cover that Paul was the only one who wasn't wearing shoes. And I'll show it right. So, as you can see, Paul's not wearing shoes for one, and also, he's out of step with everyone else. And everyone's kind of dressed as they might be at a funeral. You know, Ringo's in a suit, John is in all white, and George is in all denim, which could symbolize that he's the gravedigger. Now, there's another one, actually. It's on the Sgt. Pepper album cover, and I actually have this one, yeah. Yeah, I don't have the Abbey Road album, I know, yeah, okay, but I do have the Sgt. Pepper album, so let me just grab that. Yes, this is a cassette tape, I know, yeah, somebody has a cassette tape in the year 2017, alright, leave me alone. Okay, so, it's my dad's cassette tape. So, I don't know if you can see it, you probably can't, but here's Paul, and above his head is a hand. Paul, a hand above Paul's head. Now, some people thought that that was some sort of religious reference that meant death. I don't really know the specifics, but people thought that that meant that he might be dead. Apparently, what happened was, when Paul died, they had to cover it up, because the government thought that if the news spread that Paul was dead, that all these fans would commit suicide, that there'd be a mass suicide because Paul was dead. And so, they made the Beatles cover it up and bring in a look-alike. This guy that won a Paul McCartney look-alike contest, who apparently became the new Paul. And apparently what the Beatles were doing with all these clues was that they wanted to give the true fans some clues that Paul was actually dead. Now, first, the song I Am the Walrus. Apparently, in some sort of Scandinavian or Norse mythology, some sort of mythology, the walrus is a symbol of death. In the song Revolution Number 9, the voice saying number 9, number 9, if it's reversed, it sounds like turn me on, dead man. I don't know if I can find it, but if I can, I'll put it in. Now, backwards shit is fucking freaky, alright? It's... damn, dude. But there's a lot of backwards messages, apparently. For one, the song Get Back, if you play that backwards, you can hear a voice yelling, "Help me," which is apparently supposed to symbolize Paul being trapped in the car wreck. And if you play the ending of Strawberry Fields Forever, you can hear John saying, "I buried Paul." But apparently he was just saying cranberry sauce. And of course, some people claimed that Paul looked different after 1966. I saw somebody say that before 66 his earlobes were attached, and then after, they weren't. But I don't know. And then somebody else said that his eye color was different, and just little changes in the appearance that might mean something. And then, there was a documentary that came out called Paul McCartney Actually Is Dead, The Last Testament of George Harrison, which was this guy who sounded just like George talking about how Paul actually is dead and how the Beatles covered it up. And just... my dad told me about that one, and he told me it was so ridiculous because all it is just the voice of somebody who sounds like George confessing all of this. And it's just so ridiculous. Like, he talks about all these clues about how Paul actually is dead. And so George talks about how the new Paul had plastic surgery in order to look more like Paul, and how they called him Rubber Paul because his face was all swollen from the surgery, and how John refused to call new Paul Paul, so he just called him Fall, as in False Paul. But the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, just think about it for a second. So, your bandmate dies, so in order to prevent your fans from killing themselves, you find some guy that looks like said bandmate, and you put him in the band and expect him to just, just start a new life and just, be this guy, and nobody's gonna know. It's ridiculous when you think about it. So, no, I don't believe that one. I don't believe any of them, alright? The last one I'm gonna talk about is another ridiculous one. I mean, like I said, they're all ridiculous. This is the theory that's the opposite of the Paul is dead theory, that everyone in the Beatles is dead except for Paul. Now, this theory comes from Chris Fischel, who came up with this in 1994. He claims that Ringo was the first to die in 1963, followed by George in 64, followed by John in 65. And he says that all of them were replaced, it's kind of the same as the Paul is dead theory, except with the others. Here's a little bit of evidence that I've found. He says that in 1963, on the front cover of With the Beatles, Ringo's face is not in line with those of the other Fabs, clearly a clue that the Ringo on this album is different from the others. Obviously, he had died between the first two albums and been replaced. And then, 1964, on the cover of A Hard Day's Night, George is the only Beatle with his back to the camera in any of the photos, and he's the only one with a cigarette, a coffin nail. These are the signals that George had died. And then in 66, on Revolver, John No. 2 sings the song, I'm Only Sleeping. Sleep is, of course, a metaphor for death. Now, come on now, that's fucking reaching. So yeah, I know that people have done conspiracy theory videos about the Beatles before, but I felt like making one because I haven't seen some of these theories talked about, and I haven't seen all of these pieces of evidence presented. Is it evidence? Do you believe any of these? Probably not, because they're all pretty fucking ridiculous. So, that's really gonna be it. If you like this video, if you want me to make more conspiracy theory videos, let me know. Like always, there's gonna be new videos, new guitar covers, new skits, I'm working on all that. So, till next time, stay metal.